Christmas. What's on your heart this year? What do you bring into this Christmas season? What are the burdens you bear? What are the possibilities of being lifted and opened to the glory which is all around us? This past August, my wife and I made a trip to Ireland, which was the first time I'd been there, and we visited a place called Newgrange, which is about an hour north of Dublin, between Dublin and Belfast. And in Newgrange, there's a temple that dates from 3200 BC. It's 5,000 years old. And it's a combination burial mound and solstice temple. So we went in. It's this kind of mound up on top of a big hill. And we went, it's massive. We went in, and we had to kind of squeeze through this old ancient tunnel. I was getting a little claustrophobic. I was kind of staying toward the back in case I need to bolt out of there. But we squeezed through this tunnel and came into this kind of large temple area that had a 20-foot ceiling, according to the guide, a roof that has not leaked in 5,000 years. A stone roof. And the temple entrance, the ramp goes up to the point, they've put a window box right over the entrance so that on the winter solstice, on December 21st, at the break of dawn, the light from the sun will enter in through the temple and light up this passageway. Now, when you think about a 5,000-year-old temple that has that level of construction precision, that has that level of astrological understanding, that has that rich religious significance, it's really overwhelming. They have a lottery to allow people to be in the temple on December 21st for the dawn. It's now 5,000 years later. The light comes in 11 minutes later than it did 5,000 years ago. But, you just imagine that this temple fills with light, and you think of the religious significance of what's going on. This is a burial mound, and the light of the sun at the moment of the solstice when, the Irish don't get a whole lot of sun anyway. And now you're already kind of up north, and by this time the sun's coming up like at 9 and setting at 4, and it's worse and worse each day. And if the sun goes away, you're dead. But at that moment, the sunlight floods into the temple. It mixes with the ancestors who bring the message to the gods to remind them to bring the sun back. And sure enough, day after day following that, the days get a little longer. Now, we're not as in touch with the rhythms of creation as our ancestors were. We're not as aware of the movement of the stars and the sun and the moon. But I think a lot of us feel a little something as we're coming up to the winter solstice. The days are getting shorter, and some of us get a little depression. The days are starting to get colder. The winter solstice is a powerful movement forward. It's the turning point. It's the point at which the days begin to get longer. It's a hopeful sign from the galaxy. Now, I find it extremely interesting that Christmas comes at the winter solstice, just after the winter solstice. We do not know that Jesus was born on December 25th. We do not know historically what month Jesus was born in. But the idea that this festival of the Christian faith, this incarnation of God, comes just after the winter solstice. And when you consider what's going on in the story, both of the stories are about the night sky. The movement in Matthew's gospel of the star that guides people from the east, the astrologers from the east, where they find the holy birth. And in Luke's gospel, where the shepherds are the main feature out in the fields, They're in touch with the sky. They're seeing what's going on, and suddenly the sky bursts forth with angelic proclamation, glory to God, peace on earth. And these are the main things that are going on. This is where the story is being told. This is what Mary taps into, the spiritual wisdom and joy that's conveyed to her from some shepherds that she doesn't know, never met before, but they bring words that resonate deep in her soul. And this becomes the defining moment of Christmas for her. This becomes the truth, the wisdom and joy that she taps into. Now, this is by far not the only voice that's speaking into the Christmas story. There are competing voices, competing messages speaking into the story. Luke starts out with the edict from the emperor. I'm going to call this an authoritarian edict. And authoritarian edicts speak into our lives, whether they come from a president who will rather close down the government if he doesn't get his wall, to a landlord who will raise your rent without your consultation in any way, shape, or form, or to a boss who would make you work overtime without any consultation. Any place where a voice from power speaks about you without you. Any place where someone who has the power to determine, impact your life, and you don't have an input. We experience that in our lives. And Mary experiences that. There's an authoritarian edict that comes from the emperor that says that you've got to go back to your hometown, your ancestral home, to be registered for this census. Now, we don't know for sure. The historians have searched for this census and do not know of a census that happened at this time. And Luke is not overly concerned about that. Matthew's got a different way that empire enters into the story. In his story, Herod is looking for the child, trying to kill the child, and the parents have to flee to Egypt. It almost doesn't matter whether it's shutting down the government for a wall or whether it's a census. It's always about control. It's always about violence. It's about brutality. And these are the experiences of our lives. We have thousands of people camped outside in Tijuana right now, and a government that is trying to shut down on them, trying to stop the usual practice of service and democracy, trying to keep the people of God. Someone who was at the Homeland Security person was asked her, would you keep Jesus and Mary and Joseph out? And she assured them that she would not, that she would allow Jesus and Mary and Joseph to come in. And people were like, well, how would you recognize them? So this is the way empire works, and this is a part of the story. But it's not the only voice that's speaking in the story. It's a loud voice. It's probably got the front page headline, but it's not the only voice. There's also the voice of what I would call cultural judgment. There's a way in which the edicts, the authoritarian edicts, trickle down and find their way into the culture and begin to get repeated by relatives, by people in your close circle, begin to reflect some of these same kind of oppressive ways upon you. And Mary seems to be experiencing that. It's not a lot said about it, but it's almost like what's not said that lets you know what's going on. Where Mary, we don't hear a thing about her mother, her father, any brothers or sisters. We do hear that at a certain point the angel says, well, maybe you better go 70 miles and hang out with your Aunt Elizabeth because she may be your support. And so she goes down there and spends some time with Elizabeth and gets a lot of encouragement. But what's happening back in Nazareth? Why is she getting no support back home? Well, she's, in a very conservative culture. She's a young woman who's pregnant and is unwed, and it's unlikely that she's getting the kind of support that one might hope that a young woman would get at this particular time in her life. Goes down to Joseph's hometown, not seeing a whole lot of love happening there. They end up out in the stable where the animals are fed. They end up leaving, putting the child down in the feeding trough. What's going on here? Why is there no room in the inn? So there's a lot going on here. There's authoritarian edicts. There's cultural judgment happening. And Luke tells us all of that in the first 7 verses. And it's told as context. This is the context for the story. But this is not the core of the story. This is the backdrop of the story, but these are not the voices that Mary is choosing to center her world on. Mary is picking another voice. It's a voice that comes from some shepherds who have been out in a field and have had an encounter with some kind of heavenly being who has, now we don't know if this is some person just walking along. We don't know if it's, they seem to kind of go back into heaven. I'm not sure exactly what that means. But somehow the shepherds, who are more in tune than most people to the ways of the heavens, to the movement of nature, it's their job to protect their sheep from the wolves. They got to be attuned. They got to be alert to what's happening in the woods. They got to be alert to what they may need to do in terms of protection. And they're also spending all their time out under the stars. You can just imagine the stories, the stargazing, the, what do they call those things when they shoot? The shooting stars, the things that happen. See how out of touch we are? There's something there. There's something going on, and we're not in touch with it, but we know it's there too. I mean, last night I was out walking in the woods around 6 o'clock. I've really been getting into walking at dark lately. As the sun goes down earlier. And a week ago, I was out walking along the Bronx River, and I saw an owl, one of those great big owls. I love to see owls. That's just one of the most magical things for me. They're huge. I mean, the wingspan. I mean, they make hawks look like sparrows. They're just massive. And to see it fly, over my head and then go up in the tree and see the silhouette against with the big, the horn sticking up. It's awesome. Awesome. I mean, you could just stand there for hours and just be amazed by what's right around us. I mean, that owl is probably, quarter of a mile from us. It's not far right now. You won't find it. That's what makes it so cool. But while I was walking yesterday, about 6 o'clock, the moon comes up. Now, what is it? I'm not like, what do you call the horoscope people? An astrologer. I'm not an astrologer. I get most of my astrology from my daughters. But it was awesome experience to say, what does it mean when the night of the winter solstice, or the night after the winter solstice, the shortest night of the year, is flooded with a huge full moon? I mean, did anybody see the moon last night? It's full as can be. And I'm walking along the river, and I see, there were a lot of clouds out there, and it would kind of come through, and then it would disappear, and it would come through. And when it came through, it was like huge. When the moon first rises, it's a full moon, it's just massive. And it started speaking to me. We can actually be in touch with messages that are not verbal. We can actually feel in our souls truth that is around us, that is not coming through Facebook or social media. And this began, as the moon would disappear and come back, and there's so many little things that I let kind of get in the way of my joy. Anybody like that? And it can become so overwhelming. When you think about it for a while, and it just kind of stays with you, and the clouds would come and the moon would be gone, and then the clouds would part and the moon would be back. It's still there. It's not gone. And then this morning, when I woke up and began to do my prayers, I sit on my bed and I face out this window. That same moon was setting. It came up about 6 o'clock last night, and it set about 7 o'clock this morning. It was there throughout this whole solstice night. Mary was in tune with what the shepherds were saying to her. There was something that was resonating in her soul. After all she'd been through, I mean, you imagine, she's almost 9 months pregnant because of this edict that the government puts out, no concern for people's actual situation. She's got to ride a donkey at 9 months pregnant, 70 miles over hills, down these curvy roads, down to Bethlehem. When she gets there, the people aren't, for whatever reason, putting her up in the guest suite. She's out in the barn. All she's been through. These shepherds come. I don't know if there's a kindred spirit. Shepherds are kind of at the bottom rung of society. I don't know what is resonating with her, but when they begin to tell her the story of what they've experienced out in the field, they knew nothing about this birth, but all of a sudden they're getting messages. They're engaging with an angel, a messenger of God. And that messenger is saying something is good is happening. Something joyful is happening right now. This is beyond the emperor. This is beyond the cultural judgment you're experiencing. There is something going on here that is so important, that God is preaching good news to all people. This is good news of a great joy, which is going to be for all people. It's going to change the way, the possibilities that are available to us in the world. There are going to be different possibilities that are going to emerge. Things are going to be different. Mary pondered and treasured. I love those two words. She treasured the words, and she pondered them in her heart. I think about the word connoisseur. Seems to me that Mary is kind of a connoisseur of the Spirit. She kind of recognizes. Sometimes that word connoisseur has kind of a snooty tone to it, like a wine connoisseur or whatever. But, I've seen, and I don't know even if it's the right word. I don't know if there's a good word and another word. But, I think of, for example, my son-in-law Joel is a connoisseur of tea. And it's really cool to watch the process. If you have a cup of jasmine tea, Joel will brew it for you at 170 degrees because jasmine tea does not do well in 212 degrees. Somebody who cares enough about something to learn about it, to find out about it, not just, wow, that was a good cup of tea. How do you make, and, now it helps that he's got the hookup, the Chinese hookup from Becky. When she goes to China and gets that tea back from the market, that takes the whole game up a little bit. But, to be a connoisseur, to really so appreciate something that you want to know more about it. You want to engage it. That's Mary. She hears these words. She's encouraged by these words. She's inspired by these words. And she's not just going home from church and getting up back on Facebook and forgetting all about them. No, she's pondering these words. These are words that have some meaning for her. These are words that are becoming a framework for her. They're becoming the center of her life. They're shaping the way that she engages the world. And we see this in Mary throughout. She's always questioning. She never takes things easy. When Gabriel first comes up to her and, greetings, favored one, she's like looking at him, like, say what? Who are you? What do you want? But she listens and she ponders and she questions, and now she's treasuring these words in her heart. What are the words that you're treasuring in your heart? We got a tough season coming up. Some of us are going to be visiting relatives in the near future. That can be really good. It can be really hard. What are the cultural judgments that may emerge at this time of family? What are some of the decisions you're making about how far you want to go into this topic or that? We all got to be a little careful sometimes at the table. We're not sure what might erupt. I've also been increasingly concerned about the impact that social media has in community. I know I'm, was kind of late on the social media scene here, so I'm not a connoisseur. But I was reading from the American Psychological Association that in 2018, 40% more people speak about anxiety than they did in 2017, a year ago. And 2017 was up 36% from 2016. I mean, there's a lot of anxiety in the world right now. There's a lot of reason for anxiety in the world right now. and there is a lot of anxiety. What is the framework through which we engage the world? Mary is offering us a framework that comes from an unexpected place, that offers unexpected possibilities. What does it say to your heart? What are we treasuring in our heart? What are we nurturing in our souls? What do we want to, what is the framework out of which we want to speak to one another? Out of which we want to be with loved ones? What are you pondering? And what do you treasure in your heart? The Christmas story is a story of joy. Joy born out of suffering. Peace on earth. A joy which will be for all people. Holy God, we open our hearts to you today. Give us ears to hear and eyes to see. What is a word that you have for our spirits today? As we ponder and as we treasure the good news, what forgiveness might happen? What healing might happen? Holy God, we give our hearts into your care. We open our ears, we open our eyes to good news of a great joy, which shall be for all people.